Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Ask Me Anything session on growing your business with inclusive design. My name is Christina Wood, and I'm the head of programs here at Communitech. Before we dive into today's session, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you. So today's session is being recorded so that we can share it with participants afterwards and with other founders so that they will have a resource to refer back to. You can find all of our Ask Me Anything sessions on all of our past Ask Me Anything sessions on our website. We do have a presentation today, but we do welcome your questions throughout the presentation as well as the Q&A portion afterwards. And so we invite you to put your questions into the Q&A section. If you have any comments, you can feel free to post those in the chat. And if you would like to follow up with today's speakers, feel free to connect with me and I will put you in contact with them and I'll pop my email into the chat. So ChristinaWood@communitech.ca. And so I think with that, we will get started. So I'd like to welcome Varun here today with us. He's the founder and president of Access to Success, and he's going to share all of his knowledge and expertise when it comes to inclusive design. And yeah, I'm so glad to have you here with us, Varun. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to him. And once again, feel free to put any questions or comments you have into the Q&A, and we can use the chat to share some information and resources out with the group as well.
Thank you, Christina. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm just gonna put an empty screen up, and there we go. Hopefully, you can all see my screen. My name is Varun, and as Christina was saying, I'm the founder of Access to Success. I wouldn't go so far as to call myself an expert in inclusive design, but it's something that I've been doing for a while, and I'm very excited about this opportunity to share a few of the things that I do and I know about inclusive design with you. Just very quickly, I'm a South Asian male. I'm wearing glasses. My pronouns are he, him. And throughout this conversation, throughout this discussion today, I want to encourage all of you to send in your questions, send in your comments at any point throughout this hour that we have together. So with that, let's go into cookies and apples. Hopefully you've had your lunch, so you won't hate me about the name. So after your lunch, the first thing you have is a pop quiz. What do the following things have in common? Gesture control, typewriters, and electric toothbrushes. Any idea? Feel free to send in your thoughts in chat. I'm going to pause for a second or two and see if anyone can pick up on what's common between gesture control, typewriters, and electric toothbrushes. Okay. So far, I don't think anybody's got it yet, so I'm going to go in. The thing that's in common in all of these is the fact that this is intentional accessibility and accidental scale. Gesture control was invented by a person who wanted to create a method of interacting with a computer that didn't require the force of hand, and that company called Fingerworks was acquired by none other than Steve Jobs. Typewriters were invented because the inventor of typewriter was like me, hard of hearing, and couldn't speak with his wife over the phone, so he invented typewriters. Electric toothbrushes were invented because it was for people with upper limb mobility. Like me, I have Erb's palsy, which is a form of partial paralysis in the left arm. People with upper limb mobility sometimes found it difficult to use manual toothbrushes, and so electric toothbrushes were invented, and they accidentally got really popular in the mass market. So their continued availability to this day is entirely accidental. So hopefully you get a bit of an idea of where I'm going with this. So let's go into the second pop quiz for the day. What do the following things have in common? OXO Good Grip pop containers, Apple iPhone, and the first images from NASA's James Webb Telescope. I'm going to pause for a second again. Let me know if anyone can pick up on it. Send us your thoughts in chat. It's all right. You don't have to be shy. I don't bite. Okay, well, it is a tough one. So the thing that's in common in all of these is intentional accessibility and intentional scale. What do I mean by that? The Oxford Goodrip containers, I came across them for the first time when I was visiting my brother in Florida, and I saw my little niece use it. This thing is a cookie box. It's got a little button on the top, and you just put the lid on, and you press the button, and the box seals itself. It becomes airtight. To open the lid, you just press the button again, it pops out and turns into a handle, and you can take it off easily, which means that anybody, a little child, somebody with arthritis, anyone can use this very comfortably, and you don't have to struggle with how you have to sometimes struggle with those airtight rubber seals of boxes. The Apple iPhone, some of you might find this interesting, and I don't think many of you are gonna know what this is about. The Apple iPhone back button is a button. The logo at the back of an iPhone is a button. Did any of you know that? This is our chance to brag. If you did know that, you can let us know again in chat. This thing, the Apple logo at the back, is a button, and you can turn it on in accessibility settings of all places. You have two options. You have double tap or triple tap. And you can see on the screen what options are for double tapping. If you double tap, you can set it for as an app switcher, a camera, a screenshot, a number of different things. And the last one, the NASA telescope images, they wrote the best alt text for these images on Twitter that I have ever seen. Alt text is for people who are blind or who have low vision and can't see the images. So alt text helps describe what's in an image. And they wrote the most descriptive and informative alt text I've written, to the extent that that alt text itself went viral. And that alt text itself was picked up by mainstream news media and journalists in terms of both how good the alt text was and for describing the image itself in their own publications. This, in other words, was delightfully accessible. So, can we have intentionally delightful accessibility? So let's go into that. Let's start unpacking this a little bit before we go into the Q&A portion. So, truth or myth for you? Disability is a permanent condition that prevents one from living a normal life. This statement, the fact that I'm asking if it's a truth or myth, is enough of a hint that it is going to be a myth. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother with the statement in this session. So yes, this statement that disability is a permanent condition that prevents one from living a normal life is a myth. It stems from the historic definition of how disability was considered, and that's the legal or medical model of disability, according to which it refers to someone who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment. But now the social model of disability talks about disability as a mismatch between an environment, societal attitudes, and a person. If I am hard of hearing, I do wear a hearing aid in my right ear. And if I can't understand what somebody's speaking to me, maybe on a Zoom call, I could actually call that a mismatch between me and my environment as Zoom, because if you address that mismatch with live captioning, for instance, which is, by the way, available on Zoom right now, my disability or the roadblocks posed by that disability get addressed. That's the social model of disability. Going deeper, a little bit deeper into the social model of disability, the social model of disability is actually defines disability or abilities or accessibility as a spectrum. In case of visual disabilities, you might have permanent, temporary, or situational disabilities, where you have permanent disabilities like blindness or low vision, but you have temporary quote unquote disabilities like when you're recovering from eye surgery and you have bright light sensitivity. My speaker, who was actually supposed to be here, there's a bit of an emergency going on at Communitech, which is why Christina is off camera, but let's continue in the meantime. Christina, please let us know if you need to take care of anything here. Um, so here, accessibility is on a spectrum from permanent disabilities to situational disabilities. As I was saying, my speaker, who was actually supposed to be here with me today, has a migraine attack. And because of that, she actually has a very serious bright light sensitivity right now. And that's a temporary or a situational disability. Similarly, you can continue it to auditory disabilities, where it's somebody like me, where I have permanent hearing loss, but it could also be if you are struggling to understand somebody speaking a different language. It could be an ear pain or ear infection. You can continue this for motor disabilities and for cognitive disabilities. It's disability and accessibility across a spectrum. And when you start thinking about this on a spectrum, you realize that this can affect you. So once you start realizing that you have different spectrum of abilities, you have what's called a concept of designing for edge use cases. What I have on my screen right now is a very complicated looking chart. Might not be very complicated for some of you, but basically this says that people tend to design for the averages, which here is represented by the heavy cluster of dots in the very center. That's where the design works for most people. When you go past that, the design becomes difficult to use, and at the very edges, the design is unusable. Those edges are the edge use cases. That's people with disabilities very often, that's the use case that gets missed. So what inclusive design tries to do is it builds in flexibility into those average use cases so that your design, your product can be used by the extreme use cases as well. For instance, if you go back to the OXO pop containers, that's a design that's built with the edge use cases in mind for little children who can't seal the box properly with the rubber lids, or with somebody who has arthritis who can't do that comfortably. When you design for that, it just becomes, with that flexibility in mind, the design becomes overall better. This is usually around the time when people start thinking, Varun, I don't really think this is relevant to us, because you might be too small and you have bigger priorities right now. You might think that you don't have any customers with disabilities, so why really go into all of this? Or you might be selling a B2B SaaS platform and you literally can't see this having any relevance right now if you're selling a B2B SaaS platform. So truth is, if you have products, I'm assuming you're here, you have some kind of a product. Now go back to one of the examples. Let's say an iPhone, a B2C product, a customer product. You can build in that flexibility and accessibility in that product, like the back button on your iPhone, and make it delightfully accessible while making it overall better. If you have a B2B SaaS platform, let's say Workday. Hopefully some of you are familiar with Workday. Workday is a very commonly used platform, and it is infamous for its UX. It's hopefully there's no Workday employees here, but it's not the greatest UX. You can actually use inclusive design and the concept of disability as a spectrum, especially the part where I talked about, for instance, cognitive disabilities, to design that UX in a better way that makes it not only more accessible, but just a better platform overall. You have employees. For employee experiences, again, you can apply inclusive design. I was talking to this colleague a while ago, and that colleague was telling me this story that, they were trying to set up a meeting with somebody they've worked with for a while, and that person suddenly told them not to set up meetings with them on Thursdays. And they go, yeah, Thursdays in our company is no meeting Thursdays. And this person goes, no meeting Thursdays? I've been working here for a year. I've never heard of no meeting Thursdays. turns out that this was never explicitly put down in any materials. And what happens is for people who rely on having that structured materials, it makes those things better. It makes that information better. And when you don't have that, sometimes people with disabilities suffer, but sometimes everybody else also suffers. This is something you might have seen happen a lot, especially with the hybrid onboarding model nowadays, where information gets missed, where there are ways of doing things that people don't always understand. Do I have to have my camera on? Is it okay if I don't have my camera on? These are all things that affect people with disabilities every day, and you can actually use inclusive design to make things better. And lastly, with customers, there is this tendency, for example, now to use AI-based customer chat, or there is this tendency to have voice recognition-based call centers. The other day, I was trying to call somebody. I think it was some government office. And the only way to get in touch with them was to call them. And then it would go through this whole series of call and response with voice recognition, where at one point they asked me, what city is this about? And I would say Oshawa. And for the life of me, I couldn't get it to understand I was saying Oshawa. It would just hang up on me. If there were alternative ways to get in touch with the company, as I said, flexibility, there was flexibility built into this. This would have been a much better customer experience. So no matter what it is that you do, you can actually use inclusive design to make better products. But then, this is a lot that I've gone through. I promised this would be an AMA. There will be a lot of questions here. So what's the takeaway for now? The biggest takeaway for now is to actually go and implement inclusive design. You want to design with people with disabilities. You might feel that you don't know which part of your company to start applying this. The beauty of this is you can decide what's the most important for you right now, whether it's product innovation, whether it's employee experiences, whether it's your organizational culture and the culture of being inclusive for people with disabilities. It could be usability testing for your whatever product you already have. It could be customer engagement. It could be marketing. Remember the All-Text example from NASA. It doesn't matter what your priority is. Chances are you can actually use inclusive design to make your product, your company, your business better. That's the end of my presentation. I don't know if Christina is still here. We can continue this conversation. My email is varun@inclusiveinnovations.ca. You can reach out to me on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. And from here, we can go into some questions. Christina, are you still there?
Yes, sorry about that. I just got back to my desk.
No worries, good timing.
So I don't see any questions that have come into the Q&A section, but I do have a few here.
For the folks who are listening in, you've got plenty of time. This is your chance to grill me on anything that I said. If you don't believe me or if you feel this is not convincing, this is your chance to call me out on it.
So apologies for missing part of your presentation there. So one of the things that I'm curious about is when we think about inclusive design and being able to grow your business with it, is disability really a large enough market?
Yeah, for sure. So let me just put my screen up again and I can show a little bit more. So people often feel that, disability is not necessarily a large enough market, and that's a very common misconception. So let's go into I've got a bunch of slides in my appendix. It's the people with disabilities, this market, quote unquote market, is what I like to call the forgotten market. There's research that has shown that people with disabilities, if you look at it as a market size, you have a small portion, relatively small portion as people with visible disabilities, about 29%. 71% of the people with disabilities are people with non-visible disabilities. So even where you think you don't see any people with disabilities, you might still have people among your stakeholders, whether it's employees, whether it's customers, whether it's anyone else, whether it's your own team, there might be people with disabilities, with invisible disabilities. The part that gets completely forgotten about is the friends and family of people with disabilities, and then the broader market. Let me talk about that in pieces. I, as I was saying, have a couple of disabilities. I'm hard of hearing, and I have Erb's palsy, which is a form of partial paralysis in the left arm. And because I have hearing loss, I rely on lip reading a lot, which means that I have a lot of difficulty on phone calls. A while ago, Google, for the first time, launched this new thing. Live captioning has been a thing for a while, but believe it or not, you couldn't until very recently use live captioning on phone calls. There was a whole technological limitation behind why you couldn't do that. And Google only turned that tap on, I don't know, maybe earlier this year. I had my first ever conversation on the phone that was longer than 30 seconds with my wife 3 months ago. And I haven't forgotten it to this day. At the end of that conversation, my wife goes, "Do you realize this is the first time we've had an actual conversation on the phone?" And that memory is so strong for me that now you can imagine I'm not going to recommend any phone to my entire friend and family circle except the Google Pixel, because that is the only phone on the market right now which has that feature. I've got other friends who have the same disability, and you can bet I'm telling them to get off Apple, despite the back button feature. The bigger part of that, the even bigger part of that, is what I talked about in context of scalability. When you apply inclusive design, when you apply that flexibility in your products, that product becomes better overall. You saw those examples of OXO Box, for example. In case of the OXO line of products, OXO is a very large kitchen appliances and kitchen tools company. It started because it was started by a couple, and the wife in the couple had arthritis or something like arthritis, if I'm not mistaken. And they started designing a potato peeler because the regular potato peelers were too painful for the wife to use. And now OXO is known specifically for easy to use kitchen appliances. They're massively successful. That is the broader mass market success that also gets forgotten by people when they say, hey, disability is maybe not a very large market. In terms of actual dollar values, all of this combined, the income, the disposable income of people with disabilities and the friends and family. You won't believe the numbers. This amazing guy called Rich Donovan has done this research. He's the founder of the Return on Disability Group. And according to his research, the Canadian market, if you include friends and family of people with disabilities, is $539 billion of disposable income. In the US, it's over $7 trillion. Globally, it's over $10 trillion. The numbers are out there. So yeah, there is a market.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing that story, and the special story about you being able to have your first phone conversation with your wife. That's truly incredible. And I honestly can't believe it's taken us this long to have that type of technology available. Another question that I have here is, if someone is interested in applying inclusive design approaches, how can they get started?
So it's going back to what I said about, let's go back here. Maybe I should just leave my screen up. It's about one, realizing that you need to start with people with disabilities. That's the screen, right? Right, yeah. So how you do that is, one, see if you already have access to the community of people with disabilities and start talking to them. That part, at least this initial part, is common to all of your design approaches or human-centered design and design thinking. It's the same thing. You got to talk to your users, your ultimate beneficiaries of whatever it is that you're doing. If you can't find the people with disabilities, which, as bad as it sounds, is a common problem, excuse me, You work with people like us, with people who are doing similar work, people who are active in the disability space, who understand the idea of inclusive design, and talk to them and see if they can do some work with you. If you want to skip us, for example, then you go directly to, let's say, disability organizations. So organizations like Canadian National Institute for the Blind, Canadian Hearing Society, the Canadian Hard of Hearing Association. These are all large organizations in Canada that are pretty much always willing to work with businesses trying to improve the accessibility of the products, as long as they do it right. Too often what happens is that companies go to these organizations, and this is the leaders of those organizations telling me this. Too often companies will go to the organizations and say, we have a solution and we want to test it with your community. That's not how it works. You got to make sure first that you actually identify the right problem. You folks, a lot of you folks are startup folks, so you know what I'm talking about. You got to start with identifying the right problem. And to identify the right problem, you got to talk to people with disabilities about their problems first, and then you go into potential solutions. So there are a number of ways to actually get started. Where to start applying it is this, what I have here, the list here is an illustrative list of some of the areas where you can start applying inclusive design to make improvements across your entire company. Product innovation, employee experiences, organizational culture. In terms of employee experiences and organizational culture, I just wanted to quickly touch upon that. This may not necessarily tie in with the growth of your startup, of your company, but if you have a truly inclusive culture, having an accessible culture is part of having an inclusive culture. And again, to have an accessible culture, you gotta know that you're doing right by people with disabilities.
Thank you for that. I think there's a lot to unpack there. There's so many different aspects to consider and look at. We do have a couple of questions coming in from the audience, so I'll switch over to those. So we have Lee from at Say Hi. So hi, Varun, it's good to connect again and see your thinking on these topics. You've shared a number of product examples. Can you share any anecdotes or examples from other areas of an organization you highlighted, such as employee experiences, organizational culture, marketing, and messaging?
Absolutely. So I've had the good fortune of working with a fairly wide range of companies. To set a little bit of context, I didn't really go over my background before we started. I wasn't sure if you guys would be interested in that, but I run ATS Labs, which is Canada's first accelerator for accessibility startups. What that means is that I work a lot with startups which build products for people with disabilities. I also do a lot of work with companies that are doing all sorts of other stuff all across the board, and I work with them on applying inclusive design and accessible experiences. So taking some examples from that, some other examples from just stuff I've come across in terms of employee experiences, one of the most common things right now, especially in this hybrid work model and team culture, for example, is the question of having cameras on or off. Once you get to a certain stage and your team is a certain stage, there's always the question of what's the policy here? Do I gotta have my camera on at all times or can I have it off? If I have to have my camera on at all times, is there an unsaid expectation that I need to be formally or very nicely dressed with a nice, clean, neutral background? Or is it okay if my kids are running around in the background and throwing food at each other? The reason I'm bringing this as an example of an accessible and inclusive practice, the answer to those questions is because for a lot of people, let's say sometimes on the autism spectrum, the implicit ways of doing things, the unsaid ways of doing things are sometimes not completely obvious right off the bat. the question of camera on or off, or camera etiquette, is one of the biggest ones right now because of that. Now, if you ended up talking to your employees and deciding that, here's what we're going to decide as a team. We prefer to have cameras on. There's no expectation for you to have a proper background. You can take the call from your bed for all we care. It doesn't matter. Just come on camera. And if you have cameras off, that's okay. No questions asked. I'm sure we'll find a balance. If you make that explicit, then you have not only a guide for people with disabilities, people with neurological disabilities, maybe people with autism spectrum. Obviously, I'm making some assumptions here. It's not always the case like this. So not only do you have an explicit guide for people with disabilities, you also have an explicit team culture around camera etiquette. Similarly, around the hybrid work model, what's the expectation of how you design your hybrid work model, about the expectation to be in the office, around the expectation of working hours, all of it has benefits and implications from an inclusive design perspective. Now, fortunately, in the tech startup world, it's easier a little bit because people are a little bit more flexible, generally speaking. But if you have, let's say, a fixed 9-to-5 culture, then not only people, let's say, who need the help of personal support workers, not only are they impacted, not only people who have longer commute times because they use a wheelchair and have some certain commute limitations because of that, not only are they impacted, but also people who have kids, people who have to drop off kids to schools, people who have elder care responsibilities, they are also affected by that decision of having a 9-to-5 culture. But if you bring in the flexibility in there, it becomes better overall. I spent a lot of time on experience and org culture in terms of marketing and messaging. NASA's was one that I shared of how the simple act of having an amazing all text description went viral. There's another all text example that I wanted to quickly share, which is We Rate Dogs. I don't know how many of you know it. It's this silly social media handle where they rate dogs out of 10, and no dog ever receives a rating lower than 12. And because they're all good dogs. Their marketing team has some of the best all text I have ever seen. And they've gone viral for that multiple times over, not for the dogs, for the all text, because their all text first and foremost, which is important, describes what's in the image. But in the end, it also describes their perception of the dog's expression. And that is adorable. And they've gone viral for it. There is this misconception that if you have to have accessible websites and accessible marketing materials, they won't look as good. All you need to do is go to, let me see if I can do this quickly. There's a report that we created a while ago on the experiences of MBA students with disabilities. And that report was created by an agency that specializes in accessible materials, marketing materials. All you have to do is go and take a look at this report. I promise you, you'll never have that misconception again. I know I'm biased. It's our report, but it is a beautiful report.
I think that that leads into one of the other questions that I have here, and that is, how is inclusive design different from compliance? And so is compliance sufficient or not sufficient? And I heard you mention, having a website that is accessible and kind of the bare minimum of that. So I'd love your thoughts on that piece.
Absolutely. So compliance is obviously important. That's kind of a given. It's also table stakes. For a lot of people, it's not going to change for a long time. That compliance is where it will end. Hopefully they will meet compliance at the very minimum in terms of digital accessibility compliance and physical office space compliance, both of which are AODA aspects. Accessibility for Ontarians. I can't believe I'm forgetting the full form of that abbreviation. It's the AODA. That's the act in Ontario which governs accessibility. So by 2023, there's like a whole slew of legislations and requirements. I won't go into all of that, but a lot of companies will start with that. In my opinion, it's a missed opportunity. They're leaving a lot at the table that would benefit the companies themselves. That's what this whole presentation was about. Because when you start with compliance, you're just checking the box. You don't actually go into what I call that delightfully accessible stage. Can we have intentionally delightful accessibility? So when you take that approach to making accessibility a part of what you do, you're not just checking the box, you're trying to make the entire experience better for all of your stakeholders. And that's where you start applying inclusive design to create those delightful experiences for employees, for customers, so on and so forth.
I love that. Thanks for that answer. We do have another question from the audience here. So what are the most common mistakes made when it comes to inclusive design?
Yeah, so I went into some of them in my presentation. The absolute biggest one is not talking to people with disabilities. It sounds like that's not a mistake people would make if you're trying to make something accessible, but you won't believe how often that happens, where there's this concept of, in the disability innovation community, there's this thing called disability dongles, which is products that often come out of hackathons, which purport to address accessibility limitations, but nobody's ever actually talked to a person with a disability or a potential user of that accessibility product. So they don't know if this is actually even needed. And if it's needed, then does it actually solve the problem that it purports to solve? So that's the biggest one, not talking to people. The second one is, interestingly enough, trying to be all things for everyone. Sometimes people get very excited, mean well, but they try to create one-size-fits-all solutions to be completely accessible. Again, quote unquote, completely accessible. That's practically not possible. It's literally just practically, it's just not possible because disability is not homogeneous. You have vision loss, you have hearing loss, you have motor loss, motor control loss, you have neurological disorders. There's just too much diversity within disability. So what you want to do instead is you want to build in the flexibility for your product to be used in different ways, for your experiences, for the interaction with your company to happen in different ways. That's why I talked about those different categories where you have product innovation, you have your employee experiences, you have your customer engagement. You want to have flexibility in each one of those so that people can engage with you in a way that works best for them. A related point to that is that if you actually start going down that path, very quickly, people realize that there will be requests that they can fulfill immediately, or maybe sometimes in the near future, and that's okay. People sometimes get this, the related point of that is that people get scared of making a mistake. It's okay, because once you actually start the co-design process, you get a much better idea of where flexibility is needed. And then you can prioritize based on a variety of factors, what you want to act on, what you want to implement right off the bat. But you can also pause a few things. And then as you continue down this path, sometimes people will come and say, hey, what about this? You have not thought about this. That's where you say, you're right. This did come up in our co-design process. It's on our radar, it's in our pipeline, and that's okay. That's okay too. It's just, that's the reality of startup life.
Yeah, and that's a really great lead into my next question. And that's, what if a well-intentioned or well-meaning startup makes a mistake while collaborating with people with the disabilities, or while, going out and getting that feedback? What does that mean? What should they do?
First of all, I know it's scary with everything going on nowadays. It's scary to the thought of making a mistake and something like this. Uh, the fact that you're here means that if you make a mistake, be kind to yourself first. You're trying, that's why you're here. After that, it's important to acknowledge it. Don't try to don't try to sort of either brush it under the rug or, for example, a mistake happens very often on social media, for instance. Don't delete it. Leave it there. Mark it as a comment. I don't know if you're on Twitter, reply to it, quote tweet it, whatever, and say, yes, we messed up. This is what we're going to do better so that it doesn't happen again. That's where you actually make a commitment to learn and do better, but then you also got to implement it. That's where you go back to people who are deeply involved in this space so you can get some best practices from them, so you can get some structure, some frameworks, some tools so that you can avoid making that same mistake or other similar mistakes later on. It's okay to ask for help.
That's some great advice. What are some easy steps, or maybe not, maybe easy is the wrong word. What are some steps that companies can take as a first step that, might be low barrier to entry or, not cost prohibited that would be, getting them set up for starting to think about inclusive design going forward? Where is a good place to start?
So, all right, resources. There are a number of free resources available. Here are some. So you have Microsoft's Inclusive Design microsite. I can send these links, or Christina, you can send these links. These are all links in this deck. You can share this with the attendees. There's OCAD's Inclusive Design Guide. There is Stark, which is a design company, a design startup. They have an accessibility library, which encompasses digital accessibility, as well as design accessibility, as well as inclusive design and general accessibility. Then we, of course, have our own Fable, which a lot of you may be familiar with. I have no doubt Christina is familiar with them. They were a Communitech startup. So Fable has an amazing compendium of digital accessibility resources as well, specifically on digital accessibility. And then there's the one that I mentioned, which was Return on Disability. That was the market research that I mentioned. So if you want to educate yourself more about the business of inclusive design or the business of accessibility, you can go to Return on Disability and look into their research. So it starts with educating yourself, ultimately. You're here, so that's a great start. Thank you for spending time with us, with me, listening to me talk about this stuff. You want to continue it, you can do a little bit of reading on your own. You can reach out to Christina, you can reach out to me, you can have a one-on-one conversation with me. We can talk more about your individual companies, the kind of work that you're doing, and how you can start applying inclusive design to your own situations. If you have budget, there's paid help available. I can point you to that. Full disclosure, I do that myself through my own company, so we can talk about that. There are a number of other organizations doing some very amazing work. I think it starts, however, it just starts with being intentional about it. It's the topic that I keep going back to, because both in the accessibility world and outside of the accessibility world, some of the best and most delightful experiences have happened, delightfully accessible experiences have happened by accident. And it just makes me think about if you can actually be intentional and deliberate about designing those delightfully accessible experiences, like the live captioning for phone calls. Just think about how much more and how much better experiences you would be able to create. So just start with that intention.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing those resources. I'm happy to, we'll be sending a follow-up thank you email to participants that attended today and those that registered. And so happy to include these resources along in that email. And yes, we are huge fans of Fable here at Communitech. They've been part of a number of our programs. I'm so glad. Oh, and I see them in the chat here as well, or somebody put them in the Q&A.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Lee.
As we get close to wrapping up on today's session, I'm just going to remind everyone that if you have a burning question that we haven't yet touched on in the session, if you'd like to put it into the Q&A, we'll make sure that we get it answered.
Yeah, let's pause for a second. We can give people a chance to think of questions. There are a few examples as you think that I can just share off the cuff. A while ago, this startup came on my radar, and they are creating, I don't know what happened to them. I haven't thought of them in a while. They at the time, at least, were creating a bra for women with limited upper limb mobility. And I talked to my wife about it, and she goes, I want one. It's like sometimes it's just so tired. She explains to me, if there is an easy to put on bra, it would be amazing. I don't know what happened to that company. There is another company, however, that actually does do some amazing work. You might have heard of the Nike Fly's shoe. Nike Fly's shoe got a lot of publicity because it was designed for people with disabilities in a way that you can actually just slide your foot in, press down at the back, and the back of a shoe just pops back up in place. It doesn't have any lace. It doesn't need a lace. You don't even need to bend down to put that shoe on. But the problem with the Nike Fly shoe was that it just wasn't available. It was never actually available for sale. Turns out there is a company called Kizik Shoes. I'm gonna see if I can send the name of the chat. Kizik. They are actually available for sale. And if you look at their website, they are gorgeous looking shoes. They look great. And I guess you can say that my wife has gotten really affected by all of my talk about inclusive design because she ended up buying one of them. I don't know if it's from me or if it's just that she just loves that shoe, but it's a really good shoe, and she loves showing it off to everybody that, look, I don't have to bend down to put my shoe on. It's a good shoe.
Yeah, I feel like kids and adults all alike could benefit from those shoes.
And the best part is they look great. They actually look really cool. So, you know, again, delightfully accessible experiences.
Awesome. We do have another question that has come in from Wanda. So she says, thanks for the great presentation. Why do you think disability is still so often an overlooked dimension of diversity? Really great question, Wanda.
Hi, Wanda. It's nice to see a familiar name. That's a great question. And the truth is, I don't know. I don't know. I know the disability community has been trying to make that happen for decades. The same thing happened with gender equality, with LGBTQ equality, with race, with indigenous, all of these different dimensions of diversity. The tipping point, the tipping point happens in stages. There has been one tipping point of AODA and the ACA, which is the federal version of AODA, coming into gear. So that's one, and that at least it's been legalized. Accessibility, there's legal regulation around accessibility now. Similarly, ADA in the US. The second tipping point, however, especially in the innovation space, happened, in my opinion, in the mental health space. So mental health is a part of disability, the disability conversation. It had started coming into fore just before the pandemic. Maybe I would say roughly the 2 years prior to the pandemic, it had started coming into fore with startups like Calm and Headspace receiving millions of dollars of funding in the US. And then the pandemic happened. And with the pandemic, everybody realized that, hang on a second, I'm going nuts over here. I need help. And that's when people realize that, wait a second, mental health is not a disability conversation, it's an everybody conversation. And then millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of funding started flowing into mental health startups. In Canada, for example, a mental health startup called Ink Blot Therapy actually exited by acquisition. Now, maybe that might have happened without the pandemic itself, I don't know, but it did happen. The next tipping point, again, in my personal opinion, will be when, like it happened with mental health, people realize that accessibility, hang on a second, that's an everybody conversation. Everybody's gonna grow older. I'm gonna need accessible experiences later. I might end up with arthritis later, and I'm gonna need one of those oxybuxes. I don't know when that will happen. I don't know what's preventing that from happening, but you can bet I'm trying to make it happen.
Yeah, and hopefully it starts with conversations like this one. And so what I love about this conversation is we're not talking about, you know, meeting minimum standards of compliance. It's about thinking about what's possible and including everybody in that, and not just thinking about it from a product perspective, but a employee perspective and an attracting talent perspective and a marketing and messaging perspective, and looking at it from all of those dimensions.
Absolutely. To Wanda's question, I don't know why it's still overlooked, but that's my understanding of the steps it will take to stop that from happening. And like Christina like I said, it starts with you being here. So thank you for being here.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming into the chat. So hopefully everyone got their questions answered today. And if you have any questions that, you know, you'd like to chat with Varun one-on-one, I believe he had his contact information up in one of the last slides. I'm happy to share it around in our follow-up email, or you can email me. I put my email in the chat as well. And we'll definitely get you connected so that you can continue these inclusive design conversations, whether that's through products you're developing or, you know, in your company as you're thinking about employee experiences, and all of the above. So thank you for taking the time to join today's session. I apologize for this disruption in the middle there on my part. And then I'd really like to thank Varun for your time today, and all of your sharing, both of, you know, your expertise as well as your personal stories that you've seen. So thank you very much for being here and partnering with Communitech on this Ask Me Anything session.
Thank you so much, Christina. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and the questions. Hopefully you got something out of it. Please do feel free to reach out to continue the conversation. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.